Sand filled his mouth. Sand pressed against his ribs. Sand climbed his throat like a hand that wanted to hold his last breath and keep it. Michael Nodforth was 14 years old, and something enormous was trying to bury him alive. The thing had come out of the dune a minute ago. A body of packed grit and grinding pressure, taller than a house, without eyes, without a face, with only the slow, patient weight of a monster that had decided he would not leave this desert. His left arm hung wrong. Blood ran into the sand and disappeared, as if the ground itself was thirsty. Somewhere above him, a pale sun burned in a pale sky, and a floating panel of thin blue light hovered near his head, calm and polite, telling him that his health was at 7% and that he had chosen the difficulty setting himself. He had chosen hard. He had chosen it out of pride, out of a bitter little flame that had lived in his chest for 7 years, and now that pride was going to kill him. The sand shifted. The weight increased. His vision went white at the edges. He thought, very simply, that no one back home would even be surprised. He thought of a man's face, the face of the person who had told him, in front of everyone, that he was nothing, and a strange, small, stubborn part of him refused to die while that man was still smiling somewhere. To understand how a boy came to be crushed under a sand monster on the first floor of a place called the Tower of Trials, the story has to walk back 7 years, into a quiet suburb on an ordinary autumn evening, when Michael was still small enough to hold his mother's hand crossing a street. That was the evening the sky tore open. It was called the dungeon breakout later, when the news anchors had rehearsed the word enough times to say it without their voices shaking. Gates that were supposed to stay closed opened at once. Monsters poured into cities that had never known what a monster was. Michael was 7. He remembered a warm kitchen and the smell of something on the stove. He remembered his father pushing him under a heavy wooden table with hands that would not stop trembling. He remembered his mother's voice, close to his ear, telling him not to look, no matter what he heard, no matter what. He looked anyway. Children do. What he saw after that, he never described to anyone, not once in 7 years. He only knew that when the soldiers finally arrived, they carried a small boy out of a ruined house, and no one else. He remembered a woman in uniform, crouching beside him, and asking his name, and he remembered how his own voice sounded like a stranger's. The 2 people who had raised him were simply gone, the way a candle is gone after you blow it out. Grief did not make him quiet. Grief made him decide. He decided that he would become a hunter. He decided this the way a 7-year-old decides anything, which is to say with absolute seriousness. Hunters were the ones who fought monsters. Hunters were the ones who could have saved his parents if they had been faster, closer, stronger. If he could not undo what had happened, he could at least stand in the way of it happening to somebody else. He kept that promise for 7 years without breaking once. He trained every day. He ran when other children played. He read every book on awakening he could carry home from the library, and he read them until his eyes burned. He enrolled in an academy that took in every hopeful young awakener the city could produce, and there, for the first time, he learned what the world thought of a boy who wanted something very badly and had nothing in his blood to back it up. His body refused to change. Awakeners were meant to feel a spark by 12, a stat window by 13, the first clumsy skill by 14. Michael felt nothing. His status screen sat empty, blank as fresh paper. The instructors ran tests. The tests came back polite and useless. There was no core inside him waiting to bloom, no hidden trait, no latent affinity, nothing. The other students noticed within a week. At first they were cautious about it, the way children are when they suspect there might be something interesting to make fun of. Then they were certain. Then they were loud. Someone drew a picture of him on the practice wall and captioned it in the crude, cheerful way children caption things. The picture stayed up for a long time before anyone bothered to wipe it away. Michael pretended not to see it. He kept coming to class. The instructor who ran his cohort was a man named David. David was not a monster. That would have been easier. David was something more common than a monster, and, in its own way, more painful. He was a competent hunter who had never quite made it to the top, and he lived out his disappointment by punishing the students he decided did not deserve his time. He picked favorites in the first month. He picked scapegoats in the second. Michael, silent and stubborn and impossible to insult into leaving, became the scapegoat that everything eventually stuck to. David called him useless in front of a room of children. David told him, in a voice pitched to carry, that 7 years of grinding effort had produced a boy who could not lift a training weight any faster than the day he arrived. David reminded him, patiently, publicly, weakly, that awakening was a gift, and that gifts could not be earned by anyone, no matter how hard they tried to earn them. Some of the other students laughed with him. Some of them looked away, which was worse. Michael did not cry in class. He waited until he was home. The morning that everything ended was the morning of the graduation review, when each student would demonstrate their awakened ability in front of the assembled instructors. Michael walked into the practice hall in a uniform that no longer fit him quite right, because he had not been able to afford a new one, and he stood in line with his classmates and waited to be called. He knew what was going to happen. He had run the scene in his head a dozen times. He hoped, in a small, dishonest corner of himself, that maybe today his body would remember it was supposed to be alive. His body did not. David called him forward and asked him to demonstrate. Michael tried. He tried the way a drowning man tries to swim. Nothing came. The instructors looked at their clipboards. Somebody in the second row snorted. David let the silence go on a beat too long, and then, in a tone he must have practiced, he told Michael that the academy could not, in good conscience, continue to waste a place on him. He said the words expulsion and effective immediately, and then, because a man like David could never resist the last small twist, he added that Michael had at least demonstrated an admirable persistence, and that persistence was surely worth something in a normal profession. Someone at the back of the room laughed out loud. Michael did not answer him. He did not move for what felt like a very long time. Eventually, he bowed the way a student is supposed to bow, gathered his practice sword, and walked out of the hall. Nobody stopped him at the door. Nobody called after him. The corridor was cold. His footsteps were the only sound. He walked home through streets he had walked 1,000 times before, and the world did not have the courtesy to look any different than it had that morning. His apartment was small and clean, because he cleaned it every day, and small because that was what he could afford. He locked the door behind him. He set his practice sword against the wall the way he had always set it. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed and looked at his hands for a while, and then he put his face in those hands and did not make a sound, because he had learned a long time ago that making a sound did not help. He might have stayed like that for hours. He never got the chance. A window of pale blue light opened in the air in front of him. He did not understand at first what he was looking at. He had seen status screens in 100 textbooks, but he had never seen one aimed at him. This one was aimed at him. It hung there, patient, translucent, real. It greeted him by name. It informed him, in the polite phrasing of a system that had never been rude to anybody, that he had been selected as a contractor for the Tower of Trials. He read the message twice. He read it a third time. His hands had gone still. The panel offered him a choice. 2 doors, in text, easy or hard. Easy would begin with a simpler trial. Weaker enemies, smaller rewards. Hard would begin with a heavier trial. Stronger enemies, larger rewards. The panel did not explain what the tower was. It did not explain who had chosen him, or why. It only waited. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in a warm apartment, David was probably already home, telling his wife about the boy he had expelled that morning. Michael stared at the 2 words for a long time. Then a small, stubborn, unwise thing rose up in his chest, and he reached out and touched the second one. The room folded around him like paper. He landed on his knees in white sand. The sun above him was pale. The air tasted of dust. A wind moved across the dunes without any sound, which was the first thing he noticed and did not like. The blue panel returned, softer now, and informed him that his trial was to survive a single encounter and reach a marker on the horizon within 1 hour. Failure, the panel added mildly, would result in his death. He did not have a weapon. His practice sword was on the wall of an apartment in another world. He got to his feet, he walked. He tried not to think about the fact that his heart was audible in his ears. The marker on the horizon was a thin, dark line that never seemed to grow any closer. Half an hour passed. He was still walking when the dune under his feet moved. He did not have time to run. The sand rose up around him. It rose the way water rises when something enormous surfaces from underneath. It rose into a shape without a face. When it hit him the first time, it broke his sword arm at the wrist because he raised the arm on reflex, and he almost blacked out from the pain. The second blow put him on his back. The third pressed him into the ground, which brings the story back to the dune, to the boy with the ruined arm and the blood in the sand and the blue panel at 7%, and the calm, faceless weight of a creature that meant to fold him quietly into the desert and forget he had been there. Michael could feel his ribs bending. He could feel his own pulse going shallow. Behind his eyes, something bright and stupid and childish would not shut up, and it was saying, over the rush of blood, that this was not fair, that he had tried, that if he had been given anything at all, he would have used it. He would have used it well. The creature drew its weight back to strike a final time. Michael turned his head, because a person turns his head when the end is coming, and his cheek pressed into the sand, and his eyes went to something small and pale that was lying half-buried inches from his face. A splinter of light, a thing like a soft, breathing coal, drifting up out of the ground where his blood had soaked in. He did not know what it was. He reached for it because he was going to die anyway. His fingers closed on it. It felt cool. Something opened inside his chest. It was not pain, though there was pain everywhere else. It was a door opening in a house he had lived in his whole life, without knowing it had another room. Warmth moved up his arms. His vision cleared, sharp and hard. The panel by his head made a soft chime, and then began, with a kind of careful excitement it had not shown before, to write new lines onto itself. It informed him that a unique characteristic had been detected. It informed him that the characteristic had a name, necromancy. It informed him, in the polite phrasing it had not lost, that he had absorbed a fragment of soul, and that his stats had been updated to reflect the addition. Numbers appeared next to categories he had never possessed. Strength, agility, constitution. Small, real numbers in place of the blank fields he had stared at for 7 years. The weight above him was still pressing down. He turned his head back up toward it. He was still going to die if he did not move. But something had come into him that had not been there before, and his broken arm hurt a little less, and the sand around his mouth was not filling as fast as it had been, and the fear in his chest had made room for something else, something small and hot and useful. He got his good hand under his shoulder and pushed. The dune monster hesitated. Nothing so large and mindless should have been able to hesitate. It hesitated anyway, as if some part of it had noticed a change in the thing it was crushing. Michael pushed again. The sand shifted. His ribs made a sound he did not like. He kept pushing. He got a knee under himself. He got the other. He stood up out of the pit the monster had been making of him, with his ruined arm held tight against his side, and he lifted his face. He did not have a weapon. He did have hands. He walked forward 1 step. The creature drew back. He walked forward another. It struck at him. He moved for the first time in his life the way an awakener moves, which is to say a fraction faster than a body should. The blow missed his head by an inch. He turned inside it. He put his good hand flat against the sand body, and he pushed with everything the fragment inside his chest was willing to give him. The creature came apart. It did not shatter or explode. It sighed, the way something sighs when a spell holding it together lets go. The sand fell in a wave around him, and where it fell, more of the small pale lights rose up out of the ground, drifting toward him without hurry. He did not know what he was supposed to do. He held out his good hand. They came to it. The panel wrote line after line. Stats climbed in numbers he could not follow. His broken wrist knit itself, badly, but enough to move. The panel informed him that his rank had been established at a starting tier and that further souls would advance it. The panel informed him that the marker on the horizon was now 3 minutes away at a walk. Michael stood in the collapsed remains of the thing that had almost killed him, in a white desert under a pale sun, and he laughed once, quietly, because there was no one to hear him and because he had thought, for the last 7 years, that his body was empty. His body had not been empty. His body had been waiting for the right key. He walked to the marker. He touched it. The desert folded around him the way the room had folded before, and he came back to himself standing on a wide, quiet plaza, under a sky that had no sun at all. Other people stood on the plaza. Dozens of them. Most were older than he was. Most had weapons. All of them looked as shaken as he must have looked, and one of them, a girl about his age with a short practical braid and a bandage on her forearm, looked at him and gave him a very small, very tired nod, the kind of nod people give when they have all just survived the same thing. Her name, he would learn a little later, was Beatrice. Most people called her Betty. She had come out of a forest trial with two friends who had not come out at all, and she was standing on the plaza because she did not want to sit down, because if she sat down she was going to cry, and she had decided she was not going to cry in front of strangers. She noticed his arm. She crossed the plaza to him without saying much. She got a strip of clean cloth out of a pouch, and she wrapped his wrist properly, because his own attempt had been terrible. She did it the way a person does something they have done for someone else many times before. She asked him one question, which was whether he could walk. He said yes. She nodded and stepped back, and did not press him for more. He would remember, later, that she was the first person in 7 years who had done something kind for him without wanting anything in return. The blue panel informed the assembled contractors that they had 30 minutes to rest before the second trial. The panel informed them, in the same polite tone, that from this point forward, they would be climbing floors, one after another, and that only those who reached the top would ever leave. It did not tell them how high the top was. It did not tell them what waited there. Michael looked at his hand. He turned it over. He closed it into a fist and opened it again. Somewhere across the plaza, a young man with a scar under his eye was arguing with a taller boy about which floor was likely to come next. The young man had a coat that had once been expensive and now was not. His name was Kim Sung-hun, though the panels would eventually start calling him something grander, and he would in a few floors' time step in front of a blow meant for Michael and lose an arm doing it, though none of them knew that yet. The taller boy beside him was Martin, who had a temper and a good heart in roughly equal measure. Michael did not know their names. He looked at them, because looking at them was easier than looking at the empty space where his own family was not. Then he looked back down at his hand, at the small warmth that lived under his skin now, and he made a promise to himself. He did not say it out loud. He did not need to. He would climb. He would climb until the desert monster hunger inside him had eaten enough of this tower to answer every question it had asked him. He would climb until a man named David heard his name on a news broadcast and choked on his own dinner. He would climb until the small child under the wooden table, the one who had not been strong enough to save anyone, could finally set down that memory and rest. And in a place none of them could see, above the plaza, past the pale sky, past the trial floors and the waiting rooms and the sponsors watching from thrones in different worlds, something very old took note of the boy on the plaza. It had been looking for him for a long time. It did not know his name yet. It knew what he was. It knew the shape of the door that had opened inside him in the sand. It smiled, if the thing it did could be called a smile, and it began to arrange the floors above him with a great deal of care. The panel counted down 30 minutes in soft numbers that only he could see, and the plaza filled with the small, ordinary sounds of frightened people trying to look less frightened than they were. Betty sat with him against a low wall. She did not say much. She unwrapped a piece of dried fruit from a cloth bundle in her pocket and tore it in half, and put half of it in his good hand, without asking whether he wanted it. He was not sure he had eaten in a day. He ate it, because she had given it to him. Her friends, she told him after a while, had been called Eri and Kyung. Eri had liked to sing badly in the mornings to annoy Kyung. Kyung had pretended to hate it. Betty spoke of them in the past tense the way a person speaks of a room they can no longer go back into. She did not cry when she said their names. She only stopped talking for a moment and then went on. Michael did not tell her about his parents. He listened. He thought that was probably the right thing to do. Across the plaza, the young man with the scar was still arguing. His name traveled through the crowd, the way names do. Kim Sung-hun, someone said, top of his cohort at his own academy, already ranked at the low end of the professional scale before the tower took him. The taller boy beside him introduced himself to anyone who came near as Martin, and Martin's voice was loud, and Martin's laugh, when he found something to laugh at, was louder. Michael watched them without meaning to. Kim moved like someone who had been taught to move. Martin moved like someone who had been taught to fight. Between the two of them, they gave off the kind of steadiness that made the more nervous contractors drift closer to their end of the plaza. Michael stayed at his end. Betty stayed with him. That was fine. When the second trial opened, it opened for 4. A cold voice through the blue window explained the rule in a sentence. Contractors would be sorted into groups. Groups would enter the floor together. Groups would leave together. Or not at all. Michael expected to be alone. The sorting did not care what he expected. It put him into a group with Betty, and with the loud boy Martin, and with Kim Sung-hun, whose scar tightened when he saw the boy the sorting had given him, a thin, half-broken kid with a bandaged wrist and no weapon. Kim's mouth thinned. Then Kim looked at Betty, who had already stepped to Michael's shoulder without needing to be told, and Kim's mouth relaxed a fraction, because Kim had been raised to read people quickly, and Betty was easy to read. He asked Michael one question. He asked whether Michael could hold a sword. Michael said he could hold one. He did not promise more than that. Kim considered him for a beat, then unbuckled a short blade from his own belt and handed it over grip first. The blade was well kept and slightly too heavy for a boy Michael's size. Michael took it in his good hand and did not thank Kim out loud, because Kim did not look like a person who wanted to be thanked in front of a crowd. Kim gave him a small nod instead, the way he had given the blade, and turned to face the doorway. The doorway opened into a forest that smelled of wet iron. Goblins, the system informed them politely, in numbers ranging from 140 to 180 depending on how quickly the group moved. Objective: a stone shrine at the far end. Failure: the usual. Martin swore loudly and drew his axe. Kim drew a proper long blade from over his shoulder. Betty drew a hunting knife. Michael tightened his grip on the borrowed sword and stepped into the trees behind them. The first goblin came out of a bush, and Kim killed it before Michael saw it move. Martin killed the second and third almost together, and shouted something rude about the third one. Betty put her knife into the throat of the fourth with the quick, sad efficiency of someone who had done it before. Then more of them came, and more, and the trees were full of small yellow eyes, and Michael learned in a hurry what his second lesson in the tower was going to be. His body knew how to move now. It was not skill. He had no skill. He had never trained a swing that landed like this. It was the fragment of soul inside him, feeding a body that had been starving for years, and now the body remembered what a body was for. He cut low under the arm of a goblin that had swung at his head. He turned inside the reach of a second one and put Kim's borrowed blade through it. He did not think. Thinking would have been slower than what was happening. Something small and pale rose from each one he killed. He did not have to reach for those. They came to him. Kim noticed after the seventh or eighth. Kim was the kind of fighter who noticed things while he was killing other things. He watched Michael from the corner of his eye for the length of one exchange, and his eyebrows drew together. He said, evenly, without slowing his blade, that Michael's stance was getting cleaner. Michael did not answer. He killed a goblin that was trying to bite Martin from behind. Martin did not thank him for it. Martin did shift a step to the left afterwards so that Michael had a better angle on the next one, which was Martin's version of thanks. Betty stayed close to Michael's offside, guarding his broken wrist. She did not say anything about the wrist. She just kept it in her field of vision. Once, when a goblin flanked him, she stepped in and drove her knife into it without breaking stride. Michael would remember that, later, when it mattered. By the time they reached the shrine at the far end of the forest, the trees behind them were quiet, and Kim had stopped watching Michael like a puzzle and started watching him like a resource. Kim asked, in a careful, level voice, how old Michael was. Michael said 14. Kim did not react openly, but his jaw did a small thing that meant he had filed the answer away. The shrine glowed. The floor cleared. The panel gave each of them a distribution of points and a small line of text congratulating them on the completion of their trial, and Michael's line was longer than the others by several paragraphs, because his line explained the growth of a characteristic that none of the others had. Kim glanced at Michael's screen without meaning to. His eyebrows drew together again. He did not ask. Michael did not offer. The four of them rested that night in a waiting room the tower called a common floor, a wide stone chamber with beds and running water, and a shop counter run by nobody visible. Martin ate 3 times what any of the others ate and complained about the food. Betty patched Michael's bandage properly. Kim sat against a wall and cleaned his blade with a small piece of cloth he took out of an inner pocket, and while he cleaned it, he asked Michael, quietly, whether Michael had a family waiting on Earth. Michael said no. Kim did not press. Kim only nodded once and went back to cleaning his blade, and later, when Michael woke in the dark because his wrist hurt, he found that someone had draped a spare coat over him. It smelled of gun oil and expensive soap. It was too big by half. Michael did not move for a while, because he did not want whoever had done it to know he had noticed. He fell back asleep with it over him. They cleared 3 more floors together over the next span of days that were not really days, because the tower kept no time a human recognized. Orcs on the second. A twisting cave of glass-eyed lizards on the third. A field of tall grass on the fourth, where a creature called a dopant galler moved through the stalks so quietly that only Michael heard it coming, because his soul was learning what the ground sounded like when something wrong walked on it. He killed the galler alone, in the tall grass, with Kim's borrowed blade, and when he walked out of the grass with the small pale light of it drifting after him, Kim watched him for a long moment and did not say anything at all. His stats climbed. His broken wrist knit properly by the second floor. His grip on the sword changed by the third, from a boy's grip to something a little closer to a man's. By the fourth, he had accepted, quietly, that his body was rewriting itself every time he killed. His face was thinner. His shoulders were broader. He looked in a polished piece of steel at the shop counter one evening and did not entirely recognize the person he saw. He did not tell the others any of this. They noticed anyway. Martin ribbed him about a growth spurt. Betty smiled a small, private smile whenever she caught it. Kim only looked and filed the looking away. The system opened a doorway on the 6th floor and offered Michael a choice he had not been offered before. He could stay in the tower and continue the climb, or he could take a return window back to Earth for a rest cycle. The system suggested, mildly, that returning was often useful for a contractor's first proper hunter's exam. Michael read the message twice. He looked up at Kim. Kim, who was already reading his own version of the message, gave a small nod. They would meet again on the higher floors, the 4 of them, Kim said. It was not a question. It was the tone of a man who had decided something and did not intend to argue about it. Betty pressed a folded slip of paper into Michael's hand. On it, in careful handwriting, was the name of a guild she had connections with. She told him to come find her when he was back on Earth, if he wanted to, if he needed anywhere to go. She did not look at him directly when she said it. She was too proud to look at him directly. She did not want him to see how much she wanted him to say yes. He said yes. The doorway opened. He stepped through. He came out on his own bed. The apartment was exactly as he had left it. The practice sword still leaned against the wall. The kettle he had put on the stove 7 days ago in tower time and never turned off, because there had been no 7 days on Earth, only a single afternoon, was still cold on an unlit burner. Sunlight came through his window at the same angle as before. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands for the second time that day. This time they were different hands. The bandage was gone. The wrist that had been broken worked. The fingers were thicker. The palms were calloused in places they had not been calloused that morning. His status screen opened when he thought about it opening. Numbers stood in every field. Not enormous numbers, but real ones. The 7 years of blankness was gone as if it had never been. He laughed once, quietly, into the empty apartment, because there was still nobody to hear. Then he stood up, and he began to make plans. The hunter's examination in the city was held on the last Sunday of every month at a public testing hall attached to the association headquarters. Anyone could register. Most who registered failed. Passing meant a card, a rank, a monthly stipend, and access to the paid dungeons that fed the whole system. The current cohort was to be tested in 3 days. Michael filed his paperwork the next morning. The clerk at the desk did not recognize him at first. When she read his name off the form, her mouth flattened, because his name was on a short and unofficial list of academy expulsions that the association's clerks sometimes gossiped about. She looked up at him. She looked back down at the form. She did not say anything unkind. She stamped it and told him the time. Word traveled anyway. That was how these things worked. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, the testing hall was quietly full of people who had come to watch the boy David had thrown out 3 weeks ago make a fool of himself in public. David was one of them. He sat in the observer's balcony in a pressed coat with 2 of his former students beside him, and he did not try to hide the fact that he was there for the entertainment. Michael saw him. Michael did not look up a second time. The test itself was a straightforward affair. Each applicant drew a numbered practice sword from a rack at the front of the hall. Each applicant stepped onto a marked circle and demonstrated ability against a summoned test creature calibrated to their claimed rank. The examiner scored the exchange and issued a card, or did not. The rack was manned by an old, thin association clerk who took his job very seriously. He also owed David a favor, which was why the practice sword he handed Michael was the one from the far end of the rack, the one with the hairline crack in the tang that everyone at the association knew about and quietly refused to give out to real candidates. It would break on the second heavy strike, perhaps the third. Michael felt the crack the moment he closed his hand on the grip. His necromancy did not need to tell him. Any swordsman with 2 weeks in his hands could have felt it. He looked up at the clerk. The clerk looked back at him with a face that admitted nothing. He almost said something, then he did not. He walked to the circle instead. The examiner in the circle was a professional woman with tired eyes who had seen a great deal in a long career. She raised an eyebrow at his sword. She glanced up at the balcony where David was sitting. She said nothing, because saying something was not her job. She called the test creature. It was a hound, waist-high, quick, meant for a low-tier candidate. Fair enough on paper. Not fair given what she suspected was in his weapon. The hound came at him. Michael did not swing hard. He could not afford to. He stepped inside its lunge instead, the way the sand had taught him to step, and he put the point of the cracked blade through the underside of its jaw with the smallest motion he could manage. The hound died before its paws hit the ground. The examiner blinked. The balcony went quiet. David's mouth opened a fraction, and then closed. The examiner called a second creature. She was allowed to, if she felt the first had been an unclear read. She called something heavier, a mid-tier bear thing, that would not have been fair for the rank Michael had registered under. There was a small murmur along the back rows of the hall. She ignored it. The bear came at him. The cracked blade held for 2 exchanges and broke on the third, exactly as the clerk had known it would. Michael let the pieces fall. He caught the bear's second paw on his forearm and turned inside it, the way the goblins had taught him to turn, and he drove his bare hand up under its jaw with everything the fragment of soul inside him was willing to lend. He did not know, yet, what a heavy strike from a necromancer-boosted body was supposed to feel like. He found out. The bear's head snapped up. The bear's body went down. The bear did not get up. The hall was extremely quiet. The examiner looked at the broken sword on the ground. She looked at the boy in the circle. She looked, at last, up at the balcony, and her tired eyes went cool. She turned back to Michael. She said, in the clean, even voice of an association professional, that his rank had been reassessed at a tier well above the one he had registered under, that his card would be issued at that reassessed rank, and that she would personally file a note recommending a review of the equipment procedures at this testing hall. She stamped his paperwork with more force than she needed. She handed it to him. Then, because she was human, she added one more thing. She said, in the same even voice, that whoever had chosen his sword should count themselves lucky she was not permitted to name them in her report. The old clerk at the rack did not look up. Michael did not either. He was busy taking the card the examiner had handed him. He turned to leave. He was not going to look at the balcony. He had told himself, on the way in, that he was not going to look at the balcony. That was the mature response, and he had made a small, quiet promise to himself to be the mature version of himself today. He looked at the balcony. David was sitting very still. The 2 former students beside him were also sitting very still. David's face had gone through several small movements in a short time, and had arrived at an expression that David had probably not worn in front of a room in 20 years. It was the expression of a man who had just heard, in front of an audience, that a boy he had publicly declared worthless had been rated several ranks above where his own students had passed. Michael did not smile. Smiling would have been beneath what he wanted this moment to be. He walked out. David caught him in the corridor outside. David was quick about it. David was already halfway down the stairs when Michael reached the bottom of them, and David stepped into his path with the same authority he had used in the classroom for years, and David began, in a voice pitched to sound reasonable, to explain that there had clearly been an unusual set of circumstances in that hall, and that a proper review would surely produce a fairer picture of what had happened, and that Michael, of all people, would understand how easily a young awakener could. Michael put a hand on David's chest. It was not a punch. He did not want it to be a punch. A punch would have been a story, and stories in a corridor of the association headquarters had consequences a boy with a fresh card did not need. He simply put the flat of his palm against the front of David's coat, just under the ribs, in the soft place between them, and he let a very small amount of what the sand had taught him flow through his arm. David's air left him in a single sharp cough. David's knees folded. David went down onto them in the corridor, in his pressed coat, in front of 2 of his former students who were still on the stairs behind him, and he could not, for a long moment, remember how to draw breath. Michael crouched in front of him. He was, he noticed, taller than David now when they were both on their knees. That was new. He did not say very much. He said, quietly, that David had been right about one thing, which was that a gift could not be earned. He said that some gifts came late. He said that he hoped David would take good care of the students he still had. He said all of it in the calmest voice he had ever used to anyone. Then he stood up, and he stepped around David, and he walked out of the association headquarters with a licensed hunter's card in his coat pocket. He was on the news that evening. Not by name yet, only as a low-tier applicant who had been reassessed on the spot for an unusually clean pair of kills. It was a small item, tucked between the weather and the sports. A woman in an apartment in another district watched it while she folded laundry. Her name was Betty's mother, and she did not know why her daughter had been unusually cheerful on the phone that afternoon. That was the first evening. There were others. Over the following weeks, Michael took paid dungeons in a steady sequence, and his card climbed the tiers on it faster than any card that Clerk had ever stamped. He picked up equipment. He picked up a coat that fit. He picked up a proper sword, a good one, made by a smith who did not ask why a boy his age wanted a blade of that weight. He put money into an account for the first time in his life and stared at the number in it for a long time before he closed the screen. He also went to the address on Betty's paper. She opened the door herself. She had been asleep. Her hair was pushed to one side. She stared at him for 2 full seconds before she recognized him because his shoulders were broader and his face was clearer, and he was standing straight in a way he had not been standing on the plaza. And then she said his name, and her voice cracked on it in a small, embarrassed way that she immediately looked annoyed about. She let him in. She fed him. She introduced him to her guildmaster, a heavy, bearded man who ran a mid-sized outfit called Iron Brace, and who took one look at Michael and named a salary that Michael politely, quietly, did not accept, because Michael had already decided he was not going to be anyone's employee. The guildmaster did not seem offended. He gave Michael a standing invitation instead. He said the door was open when Michael changed his mind. Betty walked Michael to the door afterwards. In the hallway outside her apartment, she stopped him with a hand on his sleeve. She did not look at him directly. She said, very carefully, that if he was going to keep climbing without a guild, she would like it very much if he would tell somebody, sometimes, where he was going. She said she was not asking him to promise. She just did not want to open the news one morning and find him in it. He said he would try. She nodded once, and let go of his sleeve, and closed the door behind him. He was smiling on the way down the stairs. He did not stop smiling until he stepped into the street. He did not smile in the street, because in the street, standing in the light of a broken street lamp, on the corner opposite the building, there was a man he had never seen before. The man was old, not the old of a grandfather in a park, the old of a piece of stone. He wore a dark, plain robe, cut in a style that had not been made in Michael's city, in Michael's lifetime. He carried a sword across his back, in a scabbard tied with dark cord. His hair was silver and long. His eyes, when they lifted to meet Michael's across the street, were the flat, patient eyes of a man who had already decided how a conversation was going to end. He did not belong here. Michael's necromancy told him so before his eyes did. The small, warm door inside his chest went cold at once, the way a room goes cold when a window opens on a winter night. Something in the street across from him was not from this world. Something in the street across from him was strong enough that the fragment of soul inside Michael's chest tried, on instinct, to shrink away from it. The old man on the corner smiled without moving his mouth much. He inclined his head, the smallest polite fraction. He said one thing, and he said it in a language Michael had never heard, and yet Michael understood it clearly, the way a nightmare is always in a language you know. The old man said that he had come a long way to meet the boy who had killed his student. Michael did not know, yet, what student he meant. He would find out. He would find out in a way that would put him on the floor of an alley 2 nights later, with 3 ribs cracked, and his own blood in his mouth, and it would be the closest he had come to dying since the sand. But that was 2 nights away. Tonight, in a quiet street in a quiet neighborhood, an old man from a world called Murim smiled without moving his mouth, and Michael, standing on the pavement outside Betty's apartment building, understood, in a very calm way, that the tower had noticed him. The old man did not attack in the street. That would have been beneath him, and Michael understood, without being told, that beneath him was a thing this old man cared about. He inclined his head the same small, polite fraction a second time. He said, in that language Michael should not have been able to understand, that a proper meeting deserved a proper place, and that he would be waiting for the boy the following night. At an hour, Michael would know when the hour came. Then he was not on the corner anymore. He had not walked away. He had not turned. He had simply stopped being a thing standing under a broken street lamp, and the street lamp finished flickering, and the corner was empty, and a stray cat that had been frozen behind a rubbish bin remembered how to breathe and ran. Michael stood on the pavement for a long moment. His hand had gone to the hilt of the sword at his hip without his permission. He made himself take it off. He walked home. He did not sleep well. He did not really sleep at all. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and tried to work out, calmly, what a boy did when a piece of stone in the shape of a man had told him he had killed someone the piece of stone had loved. He could not remember killing anyone that mattered. The goblins had not been students. The bear in the testing hall had not been a student. The dopant gaoler in the tall grass had not been... He sat up in the dark. 2 floors ago, on the 4th, in the grass. He had not been alone in that grass. He had heard the wrong footstep before anyone else, and gone to it before the others could, because his necromancy had heard it, and there had been a shape in the grass that had not been the gaoler. A man. A quiet man in a dark robe of a style Michael had never seen made in his city, with a sword across his back tied with dark cord. Michael had killed him first, before he had killed the gaoler. He had not thought about it since. There had been so many small pale lights that day. The man's soul had come to him, along with the rest of them, unremarkable, in a hand that was learning what a hand was for. He put his face in his hands and laughed once into them, without any joy in the sound. Of course the first person he had killed, who had not been a monster, had been someone's student. Of course the piece of stone on the corner had come to find the boy who had done it. There was a shape to the way his life went now, and he was beginning to recognize the shape. He got up and made tea. He drank it standing at the window. Outside, the city moved through its usual small business of a Wednesday night, oblivious. The next morning, before Michael had finished his second cup of anything, a second panel opened in his apartment. It was not the tower's panel. Its edges were the wrong shape, and its color was wrong, a deep red-black instead of the polite blue he was used to. It hung in the air of his kitchen, and it addressed him without any greeting. It informed him that a sponsor had taken interest in him. It informed him that this sponsor requested the honor of a contract. It informed him, in phrasing that was less polite than the tower's but somehow more direct, that the sponsor's name was the Steel Bloodlord, and that if he wished he might speak with her now. He set down his tea. The panel widened. Behind it, or through it, a woman was sitting on a throne. She was not human. He knew this before he had catalogued a single detail. She was shaped like a woman, and her face was the kind of face artists tried to paint and gave up on. But the air around her was not the air of a room he could ever walk into. She wore armor the color of old iron in old blood. Her hair was tied back in a way that was practical rather than pretty. Her eyes, when they settled on him, did not blink. She looked at him for a long time. It was not the look of a merchant assessing a purchase. It was the look of a general inspecting a recruit who had walked in off the wrong road. She spoke. She spoke in a voice that did not need to be loud to fill his kitchen. She said she had watched him take a piece of a wrong world into himself in the sand. She said she had watched him take another piece of a wrong world into himself in the tall grass. She said the tower had opened a door in him that most who received such a door died within a season of receiving. She said, with the calm of a person stating a professional opinion, that she did not intend for him to die. She offered him a contract. The contract was straightforward. She would sponsor him, which meant a private shop of skills and items priced in a currency she named contractor points, awarded when her interest in his progress was satisfied. She would answer certain questions when he asked them, though not all questions. She would occasionally require him to fight for her when her interests aligned with his own. In exchange, he would carry her name. He would be, in the tower's records, an apostle candidate of the Steel Bloodlord. He asked her, because he was a boy, and boys ask when they should not, what her interest in him was. She was silent for a beat. Then she told him that a very long time ago she had had a world she loved, and that a very old enemy had ended it, and that she had spent longer than he could measure looking for a person shaped in the right way to help her end the enemy in return. She said she was not certain he was the person. She said she had learned not to be certain about anything. She said she was willing to find out. Michael looked at her. He thought about the piece of stone on the corner. He thought about the way the street lamp had flickered. He thought about the fact that he was a 14-year-old boy with a licensed hunter's card and a good sword, and no one waiting for him at home, and that a woman on a throne in another world had just told him that she needed him. He said yes. The red-black panel wrote a line on itself in a script he could not read, and then in a script he could, and the line said that a contract had been formed. A store window opened beside the panel. Skills, techniques, items, ranked and priced, waiting for a currency he did not have yet. The Steel Bloodlord did not smile at him. She inclined her head, once, a fraction. It was the same gesture the old man on the corner had used. On her, it was different. She said, before the panel closed, that another sponsor would be reaching for him within the hour, and that he should hear her out, because the two of them had already agreed, in a fashion, that neither would take him whole. The panel folded and was gone. The second panel opened within the hour, exactly as she had said. It was white and pale, and it addressed him with the softness of a woman speaking through a paper screen. Its sponsor was called the White Crane Sword. Angela, she said, if he preferred a name a human tongue was shaped for. She would teach him how to hold the sword he had been swinging like a boy in a testing hall. She would teach him a technique of hers she had spent a long life refining. She had a cherished wish, too, though she did not name it yet. She said she would name it when he had earned the right to hear it. She asked him whether he was willing. He was willing. He signed her contract the same morning he had signed the other. He did not know, then, that this was unusual. He would learn later that most contractors served one sponsor and quarreled with the servants of any other. He did not have the education to know he was doing something rare. He did what felt right. Angela's first lesson began that afternoon in a training room that was not on Earth. He stepped through a doorway the pale panel opened in the middle of his living room, and he stepped out onto a wooden floor in a hall, with paper walls and a small garden visible through an open door. Angela was already there. She was tall. Her hair was long and white, and it moved when there was no wind. She was younger than he had expected, or she looked younger. Time on her was a strange thing. She looked at his stance and sighed, patient and long-suffering. She fixed his stance. She fixed his grip. She fixed his footwork. She fixed the angle of his hips. She made him hold a wooden practice sword out in front of him for a length of time that his necromancer body handled, and his human pride did not. And when his arm finally trembled, she made him hold it for a while longer. She did not shout. She did not mock. She corrected. Each correction was a small, precise thing. Each correction stayed corrected, because Angela did not repeat herself. By the end of the first afternoon, he was moving cleaner than he had ever moved. By the end of the first week, he was doing things with a blade that a professional hunter of 10 years standing would have paused to watch. By the end of the first week, he was also 2 nights past the hour the old man on the corner had promised him. He had not forgotten. He had told Angela on the first day because she was the sort of person you told things to. She had listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she had asked him one question, which was whether he intended to run. He said no. She said good. She said, calmly, that a sword hall existed to teach a student how to survive the day he could not run. She said that if his day was tonight, they had better use the afternoon well. They used it well. He walked home from her training hall at dusk on the second day. He did not go by way of the street lamp corner. He did not need to. The old man came to him. The alley was behind a shuttered restaurant 3 blocks from his apartment. It was empty when he entered it, and it was not empty when he was halfway down it. The old man was simply at the far end, standing in a way that made the alley feel narrower than it was. His scabbard was still tied with dark cord. His name, he said, was Albert. He had trained a boy who had been sent into the tower for reasons Michael did not need to know. That boy had been the last of a line Albert cared about. That boy was dead. Albert was here to correct that. He drew. Michael had thought he was ready for it. Angela had been drilling him for a week, and his necromancer body had been rewriting itself for weeks before that, and he had told himself, walking down the alley, that whatever came he would meet it standing. He had not been ready for it. He was not sure any boy of 14 could have been ready for it. Albert crossed the alley without appearing to move his feet. Michael's blade came up on Angela's stance, on Angela's grip, on Angela's angle, and Albert's blade met it, and turned it aside with the boredom of a man swatting an insect. The second cut opened Michael's shoulder to the bone. The third cut, only, spared his life, because Albert had wanted to make the third cut a specific place, and Michael had, by pure animal terror, moved a hand's width in the right direction at the right second. Michael went down into a wall. The wall broke. Bricks fell. He got up. He should not have. His shoulder was open. His left leg was not answering him properly. His sword was still in his hand. He got up because standing up was a decision his necromancer body had already made, and because the small, warm door inside his chest had shifted from cold to hot, because the fragment of soul he had taken from Albert's student in the grass was speaking to him now, quietly, saying it recognized this old man, saying it remembered the smell of this old man's practice hall, saying it wanted to be forgiven. Michael was not going to forgive it. That was not what necromancy was for. But he could use the memory. He moved the way the memory moved. Albert's next cut went past him because Michael's feet were now, for the space of a second, the feet of a boy who had grown up in a wuxia hall on the other side of a door in the sky. He turned inside Albert's blade. He put the point of his own into Albert's side. Albert did not die. The wound was not deep. Albert had allowed it because he had been surprised, and Albert had already, in the same second, decided that the surprise would not happen twice. He stepped back one clean step and looked at the boy with new eyes, and for the first time, the flat, patient, old stone quality of his gaze went away, and in its place was a professional assessment, and the professional assessment was worse than the boredom had been. He said, quietly, that he understood now. He said the boy was carrying his student inside him. He said that was an interesting thing to have done. He said he would be taking his student back. He came at Michael again. He came, this time, without any restraint. Michael did not survive the next exchange on his own. He survived it because a red-black window opened behind him in the alley, and the Steel Bloodlord's voice moved through him, brief and level, telling him to take his sword in the second position of a technique he had not yet been taught, and his arm obeyed her before his mind had processed the words. Albert's blade found the flat of Michael's blade in the second position and slid along it in a way Albert had not intended, and the tip that had been meant for Michael's throat went a hand's width wide of it, and then a pale panel opened on his other side, and Angela's voice moved through his other arm, and his blade did a thing Angela had drilled into him for exactly this circumstance without telling him what the circumstance was, and the pommel of his sword struck Albert under the jaw with the whole moving weight of a boy who had been climbing a tower for weeks. Albert's head snapped up. Albert did not go down. Old stone does not go down. But he was, for a fraction of a second, off his line. And Michael's necromancy had been waiting for that fraction, because the fragment of Albert's student had been waiting for it, and it took the fraction, and it moved his blade a very small distance in the exact place that mattered, and the blade went in under Albert's ribs and up, and it kept going, and it stopped when it met something that was not a rib. Albert looked down at the boy on the other end of the sword. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the voice he had used on the corner, that the boy would learn, in time, that he had killed 2 students of the same line tonight, and not one. He said this without heat. He said it the way a teacher gives a last correction to a lesson. He stepped back off the blade. He set his own sword down against the alley wall in a careful, respectful way, hilt up, the way a swordsman puts a sword down when he does not intend to pick it back up. He sat down against the wall beside it. He closed his eyes. He did not open them again. The small, pale light of him rose slowly. It was not the small, pale light of a goblin. It was a great deal larger than that, and it moved without hurry, and it did not want to come to Michael. Michael reached for it anyway. His hand was shaking. His shoulder was still open to the bone. The light came, in the end, because the necromancy would not be refused. His body wrote itself over. The alley tilted. He went to one knee. The pale window and the red-black window stayed open on either side of him for a long moment. Angela's voice, softer now, told him he had done well. The Steel Bloodlord said nothing, which was, from her, a form of praise. The 2 windows closed. He sat in the alley for a while. His shoulder knit. His leg came back. The bricks around him stayed broken, because bricks did not repair themselves. Somewhere across the city, on a balcony in an apartment he did not know, a woman named Betty had bolted upright in bed for no reason she could name. He walked home in the dark. He did not run. His hands were steady by the time he reached his door. He slept. He slept properly. He dreamed of a training hall he had never been in, and of a boy in the grass who forgave him, though the necromancy had not asked the boy to. He woke to the news. The news was that a hunter's body had been found in an alley behind a shuttered restaurant. A hunter no one in the city knew, dressed in clothes from a country no tailor in the city made. The news was that the association had marked the case as connected to the Tower of Trials, and that a cross-dimensional intrusion was being investigated, and that citizens were being asked to report any sighting of unfamiliar armed persons to their local hunter branch. The news did not name Michael. Michael read it twice. He set down his tea, he put on his coat, he went back to Angela's hall. Angela was waiting for him. She did not ask him about the alley. She asked him whether he was ready to begin the second lesson. He said he was ready. She began the second lesson. The second lesson was the first of the 7 techniques she had named as her cherished teaching, a form she called the first of the 7 white sword techniques, and she taught it to him slowly and precisely, and he learned it in 3 days, which was faster than she had expected and slower than she had hoped, and she told him so, without heat, because that was the way she taught. He climbed a floor in the tower the following week. He climbed a floor the week after that. He climbed with Kim and Martin and Betty, sometimes, when the tower matched them, alone or with strangers when it did not. His card climbed on Earth. His stipend became a joke he did not need. He moved out of the small apartment and into a larger one that he chose for its light and its distance from the corner where the street lamp had flickered. He did not tell Betty which building it was in. He did not tell anyone. He gave money, quietly, to the family of a boy in his old cohort who had failed his exam and could not afford to try again. He did not put his name on the envelope. The boy passed on the 3rd try. Michael read about it in a small item in the association's monthly newsletter and folded the paper and set it in a drawer. He grew. By the winter, he was recognizable in the street to people who followed the hunter feeds. By the spring, he was on the cover of 2 of them. His face on those covers was still young, but it was not the face that had walked into a testing hall carrying a sword with a cracked tang. It was a face that had killed a man from another world in an alley and had not slept badly since. Angela told him, one afternoon, that his eyes had changed, and that she was proud of it in a way she was not sure was kind of her. He asked her then what her cherished wish was. She was quiet for a long time. She was standing in the small garden of her hall, in the doorway of the paper wall, with the light on her hair. She said that a long time ago she had had a clan. She said that a very old enemy had ended it. She said that the person who had ended it had not been the piece of stone he had killed in the alley, and that Michael should not confuse one old cruelty for another. She said the clan had a specific tree that grew in a specific courtyard, and that the tree had bloomed once every 7 years, and that when it bloomed, the children of the clan had held out their hands, and small pale petals had settled in their palms. She said she wanted to see that tree bloom again. She said she was aware that this was a childish wish for a woman who had lived as long as she had. She said she had it anyway. Michael did not answer at first. He had learned, from her, that not every silence needed a word in it. He told her, after a while, that he would find a way. She looked at him. She did not answer him either. The spring became a summer, and the summer brought a boy off a train. Michael did not see him get off the train. He did not need to. His necromancy told him within a day that a new wrong world was walking around in his city. The wrong world was younger than Albert had been. It walked with less care. It did not bother to shroud itself in an old man's stillness. It came into the city with a sword tied across its back with dark cord, in a coat that had been made in a country no tailor in this city made, and it began, in a systematic, unhurried way, to ask after the boy who had killed the swordsman named Albert. The wrong world's name was Akutagawa Naman. He was older than Michael by 4 years, and younger than Albert by 4 centuries. He had studied under Albert since he had been small enough to hold a wooden practice sword with both hands. He had loved the old man in a distant, formal way that his father had never allowed him to love his father. When Albert had gone into the tower to retrieve the soul of his last student, Akutagawa had asked to go with him. Albert had refused. Albert had told him to stay in the hall and continue his forms. Akutagawa had continued his forms for exactly as long as it had taken word to reach him that Albert would not be coming back. Then Akutagawa had left the hall, and he had come to Earth. He did not at first know Michael's name. He knew a boy had done it. He knew the boy was young. He knew the boy had absorbed his master's soul into himself, because Akutagawa understood necromancy in a way that men of his line were taught to understand necromancy, which was as an obscenity. Everything else, he would find out. He was patient about finding out. He asked in the right places. He paid, in the coin of his world, which people in Michael's city were surprised to find took the shape of very old and very valuable coins that any coin dealer would accept without questions. Within 3 days, he had a name. Within 4, he had an address that Michael had never given anyone, because Akutagawa had gone to the association clerk, who had handed Michael a sword with a cracked tang, and the clerk, who owed one man a favor and was afraid of another, had folded quickly under a question asked by a man with old and patient eyes. Michael was training in Angela's hall when his necromancy told him that Akutagawa was in his apartment. He came home through the door because he was not going to give a swordsman from a wuxia hall the satisfaction of a window. Akutagawa was sitting on his couch. He had made himself tea. He had used Michael's cup. He had not touched anything else. He looked up when Michael came in. He was, Michael noticed, a handsome young man, in a way that was too formal to be warm. His eyes were his master's, sharpened. His hands were his master's, quicker. He said his name. He said his master's name. He asked Michael to confirm what he already knew. Michael confirmed it. Akutagawa nodded once. He set the cup down. He said he was going to give Michael something Michael had not given his master, which was the courtesy of an appointment. He named a place. He named a time. He named a set of conditions. He said that if Michael failed to attend, he would begin, instead, with a woman he had followed home from Michael's testing hall 3 months ago, and that he would take his time about it. Michael's necromancy went very cold. He did not move. He knew, without asking, that the woman was Betty. He knew, without asking, that Akutagawa had been in this city long enough to have watched her walk from her guild to her apartment and had chosen her precisely because he had understood, from a hallway 3 months ago, what she meant to the boy sitting across from him. Michael did not answer him. Akutagawa stood up. He inclined his head in the small, polite way his master had inclined it. He walked out of Michael's apartment through the front door, because he too was not going to give the boy a window. Michael stood in the middle of his living room for a long moment. Then he took the cup from the couch, and he washed it in the sink very carefully, and he put it back on its shelf. He went to Angela's hall. He told her. She was quiet. Then she told him that the second technique was not ready. She told him that he was not ready. She told him that he was going to go anyway, because a boy who did not go, on this kind of appointment, was not the kind of boy she had agreed to teach. She said she would come as far as the door. She said the door was as far as she was permitted to come. He said he understood. He went to the Steel Bloodlord's window that night, in his own kitchen, and he asked her what she would give him for this fight. She looked at him for a long time. She named a price in contractor points that was very close to everything he had, and she told him what the price would buy, which was a single skill of hers that a person carrying it could use exactly once. She said it would keep him alive through one moment of Akutagawa's blade. She said it would not do so twice. He paid it. She inclined her head. The panel closed. He went to the appointment. The place Akutagawa had named was a rooftop above the harbor, at an hour when the trains had stopped running and the birds had not started. Michael arrived first. The wind off the water was cold. He set his coat on a low wall and drew his sword. Akutagawa arrived without a sound, from an angle that a person on a rooftop did not usually arrive from. He did not speak. He came in. The first exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. Michael was still bringing his blade into Angela's first form when Akutagawa's sword was already inside it. The cut opened a line from Michael's left collarbone to the middle of his sternum, shallow enough that the bone held, and deep enough that his shirt filled with blood before he had exhaled once. Michael's necromancer body corrected his footing before his mind caught up. His blade came around into a position Angela had drilled into him 1,000 times, and Akutagawa's second cut, which had been meant for his throat, met the flat of that blade instead. The impact ran up Michael's arm to his shoulder. His arm went numb from the elbow down. Akutagawa stepped through the exchange as if Michael were furniture in a hall he had already mapped. The third cut took Michael across the ribs from the side. The fourth would have opened his belly if the Steel Bloodlord's one-use skill had not chosen that moment to trigger. A cold red pressure moved down his sword arm and out through the blade, and for the length of a heartbeat his sword was heavier than a hammer, and moved slower than a hammer, and hit like one. Akutagawa's blade slid off it in a wrong direction. The cut that had been meant to unstitch Michael went wide by a hand's width. Akutagawa's eyebrows drew together. He had not been surprised in some years. Then the pressure was gone, and the skill was spent, and Michael's arm was his own weak arm again, and Akutagawa recovered his line with the small, annoyed adjustment of a professional who had just been informed that a lesson would take 1 minute longer than he had planned. He resumed. The 5th cut went into Michael's thigh. The 6th broke 2 of his fingers on the guard of his own sword. The 7th he did not see. He only felt the world go sideways under him, and he understood, some seconds later, that he was on his back on the rooftop, and that Akutagawa was standing over him, and that the point of Akutagawa's sword was resting on the hollow of his throat, cold as a piece of glass, and not moving. Akutagawa looked down at him. He did not gloat. Gloating was for men who were unsure of themselves. He said, quietly, that he had expected more. He said he was disappointed in the choice his master had made of a person to die to. He said he was going to correct that error now, and that Michael would be kept alive for a small number of additional minutes only so that the woman from the hallway might arrive in time to see it, because he had sent her the address before he had come up onto this roof. He said he wanted her to understand exactly what a foolish little arrangement she had been keeping company with. Michael turned his head a fraction against the point of the sword. It was the only motion he could make. His body was not answering him properly. His necromancy could feel every wound like a lantern in a dark room. There were more wounds than lanterns. He could hear his own heart, which was slow, and he could hear a train very far away, which he could not have heard through the wind under normal circumstances. And he understood distantly that the acoustics of dying were strange. He did not want Betty to arrive. The thought was simple and complete. It filled him up. He tried to say something. Blood came out instead of a word. Somewhere below the roof, in a stairwell, a door opened. Akutagawa did not turn. Akutagawa did not need to. He knew what door had opened. He smiled with the corners of his eyes only, and he lifted his sword off Michael's throat a small distance, so that the killing motion, when he made it, would have room enough to look like a proper killing motion when the woman came through the roof door. The roof door did not open on Betty. It opened on Kim Sung-hun. Kim had a coat on the shoulder of which the emblem of no guild had been sewn, and he was breathing hard, and he had a proper long blade drawn in his hand, and his eyes went across the roof and found Michael on the ground and Akutagawa above him, and Kim did not stop moving from the moment he had come through the door. Behind him, 3 steps down the stairwell, Martin was shouting something. Kim did not turn to explain. He was already across the rooftop. He got there faster than a man his size should have been able to. He had come in through the door already at a run. He crashed into Akutagawa from the side, blade first, and Akutagawa turned into him with the mild irritation of a swordsman being interrupted mid-sentence, and their blades met with the sound of a bell being struck badly. Akutagawa was better than Kim. Everyone on the rooftop understood this within the space of one exchange, including Kim. Kim did not care. Kim had come here for a different reason than to win. Kim had known, from the phone call Betty had made to him 20 minutes ago in tears, that a boy was on a rooftop dying alone, and Kim had come here to keep the boy from dying alone. Everything else was details. He held Akutagawa for 8 exchanges. He was cut on the 2nd. He was cut on the 4th. On the 6th, Akutagawa's blade found the joint of his sword arm at the shoulder, and cut cleanly through it, and Kim's arm and blade fell together onto the roof, and did not come with him when he stepped back. Kim did not scream. Kim looked down at the place his arm had been. He looked back up at Akutagawa. His face went a color Michael had not seen on a person's face before, but Kim stayed on his feet. He stayed on his feet because Martin had reached the top of the stairs by then, and Kim did not intend for Martin to see him go down. Martin saw the arm on the roof. Martin did an unwise thing. He came in with his axe as if he could kill an old-world swordsman with an axe. Akutagawa met him without moving his feet, and Martin's axe rang off Akutagawa's blade and turned in Martin's grip, and Akutagawa's return cut opened Martin from hip to knee in a single unhurried motion. Martin went down onto that knee. Akutagawa did not follow up. Akutagawa did not need to. He was already turning back toward Michael. Michael was sitting up. His necromancy had used Kim's blood and Martin's blood, and its own hunger for the fragment of Albert still sitting inside him, and it had made his body remember that it had been made to eat. He was on his knees. His fingers were closed on the grip of his sword. His broken fingers had knit badly and quickly. The cut down his sternum had closed enough to hold him upright. Akutagawa saw all of this in the space of a breath, and he did not, this time, look bored. He looked, for a fraction of a second, at the boy in front of him, and the calm, patient, professional line of his face slipped, and under it was a young man of 18, who had loved his master badly and had come across a world to make somebody pay for it, and who was going to have to earn what he had planned to take. He came in for the finish. Michael did not meet him in Angela's first form. Michael met him in Albert's. The fragment of Albert in his chest had been sitting quiet for months. It had been polite. It had been patient. Michael had not asked it for anything, out of a boy's superstition about the dead. Tonight, he asked. He asked for the exact shape of the exchange Albert had used against him in the alley behind the shuttered restaurant, the one that had opened his shoulder to the bone. He asked to be given that shape, and to be allowed to use it on the boy Albert had loved. The fragment gave it to him without argument. The fragment, Michael understood later, had been waiting to be asked. Akutagawa's cut came in on the line his master had taught him. Michael's blade turned into it on the line his master had taught him first. The two lines met each other where they had been designed to meet, which was inside each other, and for a fraction of a second, the two swordsmen were doing the same motion, and only one of them was allowed to finish it. Michael's blade went through Akutagawa's guard, the way water goes through a torn net. The tip of it went into the meat of Akutagawa's sword shoulder and out the back of it. Akutagawa's arm did not fall off, because Michael's cut had not been Akutagawa's cut, but the arm was, for practical purposes, no longer a sword arm. Akutagawa's blade went out of his hand and rang on the rooftop, and Akutagawa took a single step back, and he looked at Michael with an expression Albert had never worn. He was surprised. More than that, he was afraid. He did not stay to correct that. He was, at bottom, a professional. He turned and he went off the roof the way he had come onto it, without a word, without a farewell to his own blade, and he was over the edge of the parapet and gone before Michael could set his feet to follow. Michael's necromancy could feel him going. He was moving in a direction Michael's necromancy did not have the reach to chase. Michael did not chase. He went to Kim instead. Kim was on his knees now. He was very pale. His good hand was pressed to the place his other arm had been. Martin was crawling to him. Betty was in the roof doorway, which Michael had not seen her come through, and her hand was over her mouth, and she was not making any sound. Michael got to Kim first. He put both hands on the wound. He asked his necromancy for something he had not asked it for before. He asked whether it could give back. It could not. Entirely. It was not that kind of gift. But it could take Kim's dying, and it could hold that dying at a distance from Kim's body, and it could pour a small warmth into the ruined place until an ambulance could come. Michael held Kim through the whole of it. Betty called the association. Martin held the stump of Kim's arm above Kim's head with the hand of his that still worked and swore at Kim, quietly and continuously, in language Kim would later say had been the reason he had refused to lose consciousness. The ambulance came. Kim went into it. Martin went into it. Betty went with them. Michael stayed on the roof because his necromancy was still burning, and his hands were still shaking, and he did not trust himself in a small enclosed space with people he loved. He sat on the low wall where his coat was. He watched the ambulance's lights go out of the harbor. Then he stood up. He walked home. He went to Angela's hall in the morning. He did not tell her, all at once, what had happened. He told her the fight, cleanly, in the order it had gone. Angela listened to all of it. When he came to the part about Albert's form, she closed her eyes and did not open them for a while. She said, when she opened them, that she should have been angry with him. She said she was not. She said that a boy who used a dead teacher's technique to save a living friend had not done anything wrong. She said the fragment inside him had been permitted to give what it had given, because he had asked instead of taking. She said the second white sword technique would begin the next day. He asked, before he left, whether Kim would keep his arm. She said no. She said Kim would grow into a different kind of hunter than the one he had been. She said this without any softness, because softness was not what she gave him. She said Kim would be greater for it, if Kim decided to be. She said this because it was true, and because Michael needed something true to carry into the hospital that afternoon. The hospital let him in on the strength of his card. Kim was awake. Kim was gray. Kim looked at Michael from a bed with a sheet pulled up to his collarbone and one flat, empty place under the sheet, and Kim said, in a voice that was hoarse but steady, that Michael owed him a proper coat because Kim's had bled out on the roof. Michael said he would replace it. Kim said he had better replace it with something warmer because Kim had decided he was going to spend some months not being useful, and he wanted to be at least dignified about it. Martin was in the next bed. Martin was sedated. Martin's leg was going to keep. Betty was in a chair between the two of them, asleep with her forehead against Kim's mattress. Michael sat in another chair for a long time. Nobody made him leave. When Betty woke up, she looked at him and did not say anything, and he did not say anything back, and she reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, and they sat like that for a while. That was the shape of it for a week. Then Michael went back to the tower. He climbed. He climbed hard. The floors went past him in a blur that his necromancy did not slow for. He synthesized skills at every waiting room shop, combining 2 ranked skills into 1 higher ranked skill, until his available list had shrunk, and his usable list had sharpened. He bought at Steelblood's window. He bought at Angela's. He learned the 2nd white sword technique, and the 3rd, and, by the time he reached the 14th floor, he had earned the right to be told the name of the 4th. The 14th floor was a bridge across a canyon. He had not been told, when the floor loaded, who else would be on the bridge with him. The floor was configured as a duel. 1 contractor against 1 other. The other contractor was already there when Michael's boots hit the stone. Akutagawa Namun. His sword arm had healed. Somebody with more resources than a young swordsman should have had put him back together in the time between one appointment and the next. His coat had been mended. His face had not been mended, in the sense that it still carried the small tightening around the eyes that had come onto it on the harbor rooftop and had not left. He inclined his head across the bridge, formally, in the way his master would have inclined his. He said he had asked the tower for this floor. He said he had been given it. He said this was the 3rd time they would meet, and that the number 3 was, in his tradition, a number of endings. He drew. Michael drew. The fight was shorter than either of them had thought it would be. Michael did not use Albert's form this time. He did not need it. He had asked the fragment inside him, in the week before this floor, whether the fragment would come with him voluntarily, in full, if he offered it a place that was not a fight against its student. The fragment had considered him for a long moment. Then it had folded itself, quietly, into the small, warm door in his chest, and it had become a part of him, rather than a lodger inside him. Its footwork was his footwork now. Its stance was his stance. He did not have to reach for it. It answered his hand. Akutagawa noticed within 2 exchanges. His face did the small tightening. He said, on the 3rd exchange, that Michael was not fighting like Michael anymore. Michael did not answer him. Angela had told him not to. The 4th exchange ended it. Akutagawa's blade came in on the line Albert had refined for a lifetime. Michael's blade met it on the line Albert had trained his student to expect. Only Michael's blade did not, at the last fraction of a second, do the thing Albert would have done. It did what Angela had built underneath the thing Albert would have done, which was a second motion that Albert had not lived long enough to see her invent, and Akutagawa's blade went past Michael's ear by a finger's width, and Michael's blade went into Akutagawa's chest below the 2nd rib on the left, and it kept going, and it stopped when it met the far parapet of the bridge. Akutagawa looked at him along the length of the blade. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, faintly. A real smile. The first one that had been on his face since he had come across a world to find the boy who had killed his master. He said, in a voice that was already going thin, that his master had chosen well after all. He said that his own father had never once told him he had chosen well. He said this the way a person confides a small, embarrassing thing to a stranger on a train. He said, at the end, that he would like to come with the master, if the boy would allow it. Michael allowed it. The soul that rose from Akutagawa was very large and very quiet. It settled into the small, warm door in his chest, beside the fragment of the man Akutagawa had loved, and the 2 of them, teacher and student, went quiet together inside him in a way that felt like a hall in the evening after the students had gone home. The bridge cleared, the floor closed. The panel wrote a long line about his rank and his stats and his newly refined swordsmanship affinity, and Michael did not read most of it. He sat on the parapet for a while. Then the panel changed. It changed color. It was not blue, and it was not red-black, and it was not white. It was a color he had not seen the tower use before, which he later understood was because the tower did not, on most days, use it. It was empty of any warmth. It was the color of a window in a wall that had been built specifically to keep him from seeing what was on the other side of it. The voice that came through it was not any voice he had heard. It said its name. Its name was the god of testing. It said it had been watching him for a while. It said the tower had been arranging his floors, and it had been arranging the floors of the tower, and there was a difference between the two, and it thought he had earned the right to know it. It said it had a small piece of the future to show him. Michael sat very still. The panel opened into a scene. It was a room. It was a room Michael had never been in, but he understood that it was a room he would build for himself in a few years, because it was a study, and it was full of books that he had not yet read, and there was a small worn cushion on the chair that he had not yet bought. He was in the room. The him in the room was older. His hair was a little longer. His hands were larger. The him in the room was standing with a sword in his hand, and the sword was resting on the neck of a woman on her knees on the floor, and the woman was Angela. The him in the room was looking down at her without any expression. His eyes were not his eyes anymore. His eyes were the flat, patient, old stone eyes that Albert had brought to a street corner on a night with a broken street lamp. The steel bloodlord was on her side against the wall behind Angela, not moving. Michael's real hand, on the parapet, closed on stone hard enough to crack it. The scene showed him the cut. The him in the room made it cleanly. The him in the room had no reason not to make it cleanly, because the tower had, over years, taught him no reason not to. The scene folded away. The god of testing said, quietly, that this was not a prophecy. It said this was a projection. It said the tower had been running a small number of projections continuously since his necromancy had opened, and that the tower had selected a preferred projection out of them, and that the tower had been arranging his floors to move him toward the preferred projection, with the patience of a very old thing that had been arranging futures for longer than his species had been walking upright. The tower's preferred projection required Michael to become strong enough to destroy gods. The tower's preferred projection also required the two beings he had come to love most in the tower to be, at the end, destroyed by him personally, because the tower had needs that his administrators would eventually stand in the way of. The god of testing said it was telling him this because it was tired. It said it had been the god of testing for a very long time, and that it had watched the tower arrange these projections for many candidates, and that most of the candidates had never been told what was being done to them. It said it had decided, in his case, to tell him. It said it did not know whether this was a kindness. It said it thought, on balance, that it probably was not. It said he was going to have to carry this now, and that the tower would notice he was carrying it, and that his floors from this point forward would become harder in specific ways that would be difficult to explain to anyone who did not know why. It said one last thing, which was that his talent for the divinity of destruction was not an accident. It said the tower had known his line for a long time. It said the door in his chest had been drilled a great many generations ago and had been waiting for a boy to be born on the correct side of a monster invasion, in the correct city, in the correct year. It said the tower's projection called this a happy coincidence. It said the god of testing did not, personally, believe in happy coincidences. The panel closed. Michael sat on the parapet of a bridge in the Tower of Trials for a long time. He did not move. He did not think about very much. He thought about his mother's voice, close to his ear, telling him not to look no matter what he heard. He thought about a boy in the sand, who had reached for a splinter of light, because he was going to die anyway. He thought about Angela's hand, fixing his grip on a wooden practice sword, in a hall with paper walls, patient, precise, unfussed. He thought about the steel bloodlord's small polite inclination of the head, which was, from her, a form of praise. He thought about the shape of a cut he had watched himself make on a woman, on a floor, in a room he had not yet built. He stood up. He did not decide anything grand. He only decided one small thing, and he decided it standing on a parapet with his hand on the crack he had put in the stone. He decided that the tower's preferred projection was not going to be the one that happened. He walked off the bridge. The floor closed behind him. He climbed to the next waiting room. He synthesized 2 skills into a third. He went home to Earth for a rest cycle. He visited Kim in the hospital, who was learning to eat left-handed, and complaining about it in a way that made Betty laugh for the first time in a week. He replaced Kim's coat. He replaced it with something warmer. He went to Angela's hall the next morning. She was in the doorway of the paper wall, in the light on her hair. She looked at him, and she saw something on his face that had not been there the last time. She did not ask what it was. He did not tell her. He asked her, instead, whether they might begin the fifth technique early. She considered him for a moment. She said they might. They began. He climbed. He kept climbing. Behind him, on Earth, a woman named Betty went to work at a guild that was quietly beginning to specialize in the paperwork of a boy who had no guild. Behind him, in a hospital, a man named Kim taught himself to be dangerous with one arm. Behind him, in a rebuilt training hall, an instructor named David sat at his desk and read, every evening, the small item in the association's monthly newsletter that named the boy he had thrown out of a classroom, and he read it slowly, and he did not smile. Ahead of him, on a floor he had not yet reached, an old thing that had arranged futures for longer than his species had been walking upright, noticed that its projection had slipped by a small amount, and it began, without hurry, to adjust. The tower did not know yet that Michael had made a decision on a parapet. It would find out.